The complexities of human behavior have fascinated thinkers for centuries, but few have explored them as deeply as Carl Jung. His groundbreaking theories offer profound insights into the psyche, revealing how our personality is shaped by unconscious forces and hidden desires. At the heart of Jung's work lies the idea that we are not just one thing, but a complex web of competing traits, contradictions, and untapped potential. This understanding formed the foundation for one of the most influential systems of personality typing in the world today, the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator. Yet Jung's legacy goes far beyond just categorizing personalities. It invites us to confront the deepest, most uncomfortable parts of ourselves. It urges us to dive into the shadows, embrace our hidden complexities, and ultimately embark on a journey of self-discovery and personal transformation. In this video, we'll explore how Jung's insights on personality types became the foundation of the MBTI, and how his deeper concepts, like the shadow and individuation, continue to offer powerful tools for personal growth. In today's world, we're constantly trying to understand who we are. Whether it's through online quizzes, psychology books, or social media trends, people are more curious than ever about personality types. But why is this such a popular topic? The answer is simple. We want to understand ourselves better and connect more deeply with others. When we know our personality type, it feels like we've found a map to our inner world. It explains why we think, feel, and act the way we do. It helps us make sense of our relationships, our careers, and even our personal struggles. This obsession with personality types didn't just appear out of nowhere. It has deep roots in psychology, especially in the work of Carl Jung. Jung was one of the first thinkers who suggested that we are not all wired the same. He believed that people perceive and judge the world in different ways, and that these patterns could be understood and described. While Jung didn't invent personality tests, his theories became the foundation for many modern tools, including the famous Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, MBTI. The MBTI is one of the most well-known personality systems in the world today. It classifies people into 16 different types based on how they take in information and make decisions. Millions of people use it for personal growth, career choices, and relationship advice. But what many don't realize is that every part of the MBTI comes directly from Carl Jung's original theories. Jung wasn't trying to put people into boxes. In fact, he was deeply against limiting people. His goal was to help us become more whole by understanding all the parts of our psyche, even the hidden ones. He believed that each person had a unique balance of inner forces, some we are aware of, and some we are not. His theory of psychological types was a way to bring awareness to those patterns, so we could grow and integrate all sides of ourselves. The popularity of personality types today shows just how powerful Jung's ideas still are. We see people sharing their MBTI types in their bios, discussing INFJ problems, or choosing careers based on whether they're more intuitive or sensing. Even if they've never heard of Jung, they are living out his vision, becoming more conscious of who they are and how they relate to others. So why are we so drawn to personality types? At the core, it's because we're all trying to find meaning. Life can feel overwhelming, unpredictable, and even chaotic. When we understand our personality, it gives us a sense of order. It helps explain why we struggle in some areas and thrive in others. It also gives us the language to talk about our differences without judgment. Instead of saying, "You're too emotional," or "You don't listen," we can say, "Maybe you're a feeler and I'm a thinker." That shift changes everything. It builds understanding instead of conflict. Understanding personality types also helps with personal growth. When we see that we lean toward certain traits, we can start to develop the ones we've ignored. Jung called this process individuation. It's the journey of becoming whole by integrating all parts of ourselves. Personality types aren't the final answer. They're the starting point. They help us begin the path towards self-awareness and transformation. In the end, our fascination with personality types isn't just a trend, it's a reflection of something deeper. We all want to understand ourselves, to be understood, and to live more meaningful lives. Carl Jung gave us a powerful framework to do that. His work planted the seeds for everything that came after, including the MBTI and the entire personality movement. By looking back at his ideas, we're not just learning psychology, we're learning how to better understand ourselves and the people around us. Now that we've explored why personality types matter so much today, it's time to dive into the man who started it all, Carl Jung, the father of psychological types. Carl Gustav Jung was a Swiss psychiatrist and psychoanalyst born in 1875. His work shaped modern psychology in powerful and lasting ways. While many people associate Jung with dream analysis and archetypes, one of his most influential contributions was his theory of psychological types. Jung believed that to truly understand human behavior, we need to look at the inner workings of the mind, not just symptoms or surface actions. He wanted to explore how people think, feel, perceive, and relate to the world around them. Jung's journey into personality began through his work with Sigmund Freud, who was his mentor and collaborator for several years. However, Jung eventually broke away from Freud because of their differing views, especially regarding the unconscious mind. While Freud focused heavily on repressed desires and sexuality, Jung believed that the unconscious was far more complex and even spiritual in nature. He introduced the concept of the collective unconscious, a deep part of the psyche shared by all humans, filled with universal symbols and archetypes. But alongside this, he also turned his attention to how individuals functioned on a personal level, how they processed reality differently based on their inner makeup. This led Jung to observe clear patterns in human behavior. He noticed that some people seemed naturally energized by the outer world of people and activity, while others were more focused on their inner thoughts and imagination. This became the foundation of his idea of introversion and extroversion, two attitudes that shape how we direct our energy. Introverts tend to recharge by spending time alone and often prefer deep, reflective thinking. Extroverts, on the other hand, are energized by social interaction and tend to act before reflecting. Jung emphasized that neither was better. They were simply different ways of being. Jung also discovered that people perceive the world and make decisions in different ways. He categorized these differences into 4 core mental functions: thinking, feeling, sensation, and intuition. Thinking types rely on logic and objective analysis. Feeling types make decisions based on values and empathy. Sensation types focus on direct experiences and facts, while intuitive types look for patterns, meanings, and possibilities. Everyone uses all 4 functions to some degree, but we each have a natural preference for 1 or 2. Importantly, Jung believed that these attitudes and functions combined in unique ways for each individual. This created the foundation of his typological theory, the idea that our personalities could be understood by the way we use our dominant function, e.g., thinking or intuition, in either an introverted or extroverted way. For example, an introverted intuitive person would process the world differently than an extroverted intuitive person, even if they both favor intuition. Jung saw this as a rich and dynamic system, not a way to label people, but a way to help them grow. Jung's goal wasn't to put people in rigid categories. Instead, he wanted to help people understand their strengths, weaknesses, and unconscious patterns. He believed that when we understand our natural type, we can begin the process of individuation, a deep psychological journey where we become more aware of our full potential by integrating the parts of ourselves that are underdeveloped or hidden. Unlike other psychologists of his time, Jung wasn't just interested in fixing problems. He was interested in wholeness. He saw each person as a complex, evolving being with the potential to grow beyond their current self. His theory of psychological types was a tool to aid that growth. It helped people become conscious of how they operate in the world and what they might be ignoring or avoiding within themselves. Today, Carl Jung is remembered not only as a pioneer of depth psychology, but also as the original mind behind personality theory as we know it. His insights paved the way for systems like the MBTI and continue to influence everything from therapy and leadership training to online personality content. When we talk about being an INFJ, ENTP, or any other type, we are building on the foundation that Jung created over a century ago. His deep respect for individual differences and his desire to help people reach their true potential remain at the heart of every personality system that followed. The story behind Jung's theory of psychological types is not just a result of academic curiosity. It's also deeply personal and rooted in his own life experiences. After his break from Sigmund Freud in the early 1910s, Jung went through a period of deep self-reflection and inner turmoil. This was not just a theoretical shift, it was an emotional and spiritual crisis that led him to explore his unconscious mind more deeply than ever before. It was during this time that Jung began to shape one of his most influential ideas, the theory of psychological types. Jung started to notice that people seemed to relate to the world in fundamentally different ways. Some people focused outwardly on action, people, and experiences. Others turned inward towards their thoughts, feelings, and imagination. This observation became the foundation for the idea of introversion and extroversion, two attitudes that influence the direction of a person's psychic energy. Jung stressed that these were not just social behaviors, but deep inner tendencies. An introvert might enjoy people but still need solitude to recharge. An extrovert might reflect deeply but still seek stimulation from the outer world. This insight was groundbreaking, as it shifted the focus from behavior to psychological orientation. As Jung continued his exploration, he noticed that people also varied in how they processed information and made decisions. Some were highly logical and valued clarity and structure, what Jung called the thinking function. Others made decisions based on personal values and emotional impact, the feeling function. These were two opposite ways of evaluating the world. In addition, he noticed that when it came to perceiving the world, some people were highly aware of details, facts, and physical reality. These individuals used the sensation function. Others were more interested in abstract ideas, possibilities, and future outcomes. They used intuition. Sensation and intuition were opposites in the way they gathered and trusted information. By combining these two sets of opposites, thinking versus feeling and sensation versus intuition, Jung created the foundation for his psychological types. Everyone, he believed, had access to all four functions, but one was usually dominant. That dominant function played the leading role in shaping a person's consciousness, while the other functions existed in supporting or unconscious roles. Here's where Jung's theory became even more nuanced. He proposed that each function could be expressed in either an introverted or extroverted way. So, for example, someone might be an introverted thinker, meaning their thoughts are deeply internal, logical, and structured, but not always expressed outwardly. Another person might be an extroverted feeler, making decisions based on how things affect others and openly expressing warmth or emotion. This created a rich system of 8 possible function-attitude combinations. Jung presented this theory in his 1921 book, Psychological Types. In this book, he explored how different combinations of functions and attitudes lead to different personality orientations. He also applied his theory to real-world figures, such as philosophers, artists, and scientists, to show how their dominant functions influenced their thinking and behavior. This was a bold and creative move that made his theory more accessible and relatable. Jung's goal wasn't just to create a list of personality traits. He was trying to explain the structure of the psyche. He believed that understanding one's dominant type was the first step toward growth. Once we know our strengths, we can begin to develop our weaker, often unconscious functions. This idea later evolved into his concept of individuation, the process of integrating all aspects of the self into a balanced and whole personality. Interestingly, Jung didn't create a test or measurement system for his types. He wasn't interested in labeling people or putting them into boxes. He saw his theory as a flexible guide for self-discovery and transformation. It was later thinkers, especially Isabel Briggs Myers and Catherine Cook Briggs, who turned his ideas into a formal structure, resulting in the MBTI. In many ways, the birth of Jung's psychological types was a turning point in the history of psychology. It shifted the focus from pathology to potential, from what's wrong with people to how they naturally differ. It gave us a language to talk about personality in a deeper and more respectful way. And even today, over a century later, Jung's insight continues to shape how we understand ourselves and each other. At the heart of Jung's theory of psychological types are the core dichotomies, basic pairs of opposites that describe how we interact with the world. These dichotomies aren't just surface-level behaviors. They represent deep, consistent patterns in how our minds work. Jung believed that by understanding these opposites, we could uncover our dominant psychological style and begin the journey of self-awareness. These foundational opposites are introversion versus extroversion, and 4 mental functions split into 2 sets: thinking versus feeling and sensation versus intuition. The first major dichotomy, introversion versus extroversion, is perhaps Jung's most famous contribution. According to him, this isn't just about being shy or outgoing. It's about where we focus our energy. Extroverts direct their energy outward. They are drawn to people, events, and activities. They often feel recharged by external stimulation and prefer to act first, then reflect. In contrast, introverts direct their energy inward. They thrive in solitude, reflect before acting, and are more sensitive to overstimulation. These 2 orientations can dramatically change how a person views the world and how they are perceived by others. But introversion and extroversion are just the beginning. Jung also identified 4 core psychological functions, which describe how we perceive information and make decisions. These are divided into 2 categories: perceiving functions, how we take in information, and judging functions, how we make decisions. Let's begin with the perceiving functions: sensation and intuition. People who favor sensation are grounded in the present. They trust what they can see, touch, hear, and measure. They prefer facts, details, and concrete data. For example, a person with a dominant sensation function might remember the exact words someone said in a conversation or notice small changes in their environment. These individuals are often seen as practical, observant, and reliable. On the other hand, those who prefer intuition focus on patterns, possibilities, and future potential. They're more interested in what could be than what is. They often rely on gut feelings and abstract thinking. A dominant intuitive person may not recall the exact words of a conversation, but might remember the overall mood or sense hidden meanings. Intuitive types are usually seen as imaginative, visionary, and insightful. Next come the judging functions. thinking, and feeling. Thinking types make decisions based on logic and objectivity. They analyze situations, look for consistency, and value fairness based on rules or principles. They strive to be just rather than kind, believing that truth matters more than harmony. These people are often efficient, critical, and clear-minded. Feeling types, in contrast, make decisions based on values and the impact on others. They consider people's needs, emotional consequences, and seek harmony in relationships. They are driven by empathy and compassion. This doesn't mean they are emotional or irrational. They simply prioritize personal values over detached logic. Feeling types are often described as warm, considerate, and emotionally intelligent. Now here's where Jung's theory becomes even more dynamic. He proposed that each of these functions, sensation, intuition, thinking, and feeling, could be expressed through either an introverted or extroverted lens. This results in 8 function-attitude combinations, such as introverted intuition or extroverted thinking. For example, someone who uses extroverted thinking might be focused on organizing the external world with structure and logic, while someone with introverted feeling might make quiet, deeply personal judgments based on internal values. What makes Jung's model so powerful is that it doesn't treat one type as better than another. Every type has strengths and weaknesses. For instance, a strong thinking type might struggle with emotional sensitivity, while a strong feeling type might avoid necessary confrontations. Similarly, sensation types may focus too much on details, while intuitives may overlook practical realities. The goal, in Jung's eyes, was to become more balanced over time, to understand our dominant preferences and begin to strengthen the less developed functions. Jung believed that these dichotomies formed the basic structure of human consciousness. They help explain why people interpret the same situation in vastly different ways. Where one person sees logic, another sees emotion. Where one notices details, another sees meaning. Understanding these core differences, Jung argued, could lead to deeper empathy and communication between people. Instead of judging someone as difficult or irrational, we could recognize that they're simply wired differently. Ultimately, these core dichotomies offer a window into our inner world. They allow us to recognize not only how we function, but why we see the world the way we do. In Jung's theory of psychological types, the concept of dominant functions is central. It's not just about knowing whether you prefer intuition or thinking. It's about understanding which psychological function stands at the core of your personality. According to Jung, every person has one dominant function that leads the personality and shapes the way they perceive, judge, and interact with the world. This function is not just preferred. It is deeply integrated into how we live, how we make choices, and how we grow. Let's take a moment to understand what a function is in Jungian terms. Jung identified 4 primary psychological functions: thinking, feeling, sensation, and intuition. These are divided into 2 categories: perceiving, sensation, and intuition, and judging, thinking, and feeling. Each person uses all 4 functions to some extent, but one of them becomes dominant. This dominant function is the most developed and most trusted tool in your psychological toolkit. For instance, if your dominant function is introverted intuition, your mind is constantly working with abstract ideas, unconscious impressions, and inner symbolism. If you're a dominant extroverted thinking type, your mind is focused on organizing the outer world using logic, rules, and measurable facts. This dominant function becomes your natural mode of operation. It colors everything you do. It's like the lead actor in the drama of your personality. What makes this even more nuanced is that Jung insisted the dominant function always comes with a specific attitude, either introverted or extroverted. This means you might be a feeling type, but that feeling could be directed inward, introverted feeling, or outward, extroverted feeling, and that changes everything. For example, introverted feeling types often have a strong but private value system, and they rarely share their judgments openly. In contrast, extroverted feeling types might be more outwardly warm, expressive, and tuned into the emotional needs of others. Jung observed that the dominant function develops early in life. It starts to emerge in childhood and becomes increasingly strong and reliable by early adulthood. Over time, it shapes our identity and becomes the primary lens through which we understand life. But Jung didn't stop there. He also introduced the idea that alongside the dominant function, there are auxiliary, tertiary, and inferior functions. These support the dominant but are usually less developed, especially the inferior function, which often lies in the unconscious. The inferior function is typically the opposite of the dominant one. For example, a person with dominant thinking will likely have feeling as their inferior function. This can create inner conflict, but also opens the door for personal growth. One of the most interesting aspects of this theory is that our dominant function is not enough. Jung believed that relying too much on one function leads to imbalance. A person who lives only through thinking may become cold and detached. A person who lives only through feeling might become overly emotional or avoid tough decisions. The real goal, according to Jung, is integration, developing the other functions and becoming a more whole, conscious individual. But this begins with knowing your dominant function, because that's your starting point. Let's look at an example. Suppose someone is a dominant introverted thinking type. They will likely be analytical, precise, and internally consistent. They value clarity and truth, and they may struggle with social niceties or emotional expression. However, if they begin to develop extroverted feeling, their inferior function, they might learn how to better connect with others, express empathy, and navigate social situations with greater ease. This doesn't mean they abandon their thinking. It means they expand their range and move toward balance. Understanding your dominant function also helps in relationships. When you know how you and others process the world, you can communicate more effectively. You realize that someone isn't trying to be difficult. They're just using a different function. A dominant sensor might focus on facts and realities, while a dominant intuitive is exploring abstract possibilities. Neither is wrong, they're simply tuned to different frequencies. Jung's idea of dominant functions was revolutionary because it gave people a map of their psychological world. It helped them understand not only what came easily to them, but also where their blind spots might be. And most importantly, it encouraged growth. Not by changing who you are, but by becoming more aware of all the parts within you. So while it's easy to identify with one function and stay there, Jung's deeper message was about the journey of development. The dominant function is your home base, but the path of individuation, the journey to your fullest self, requires exploring all the rooms in your psychological house. In Jung's theory of personality, the inferior function holds a unique and powerful place. While the dominant function represents our most developed and trusted way of interacting with the world, the inferior function is its exact opposite, often undeveloped, unconscious, and even problematic in our early life. Yet Jung believed this function wasn't just a weakness to be fixed. It was a gateway to the unconscious and a potential path toward personal growth and transformation. To understand this, let's recall that each of us has a dominant function, thinking, feeling, sensation, or intuition, expressed either introvertedly or extrovertedly. The inferior function lies directly opposite that dominant function. For example, if your dominant function is extroverted thinking, your inferior function is introverted feeling. If you lead with introverted intuition, Your inferior function is extroverted sensation. These opposing functions don't just differ, they conflict. And that's where the tension lies. Early in life, the inferior function tends to operate in the shadow, the unconscious, neglected side of our personality. We're often blind to it, uncomfortable with it, or even critical of people who express it. A thinking type might dismiss feeling as irrational. A sensation type might see intuition as impractical or vague. But Jung emphasized that the inferior function is not bad. It's underdeveloped, like an untapped talent or muscle that hasn't been trained yet. This underdevelopment shows up in daily life through misunderstandings, emotional outbursts, or irrational behavior in situations that seem to trigger us. For instance, a dominant intuitive who normally sees patterns and ideas may suddenly become overwhelmed by too much sensory input and feel disoriented or even irritable. A dominant feeler who values harmony might lash out with cold logic under stress, surprising even themselves. These moments can feel like we're not acting like ourselves, because in a way, we aren't. We're being pulled into the realm of the inferior function, where our conscious mind has less control. Jung didn't see this as a flaw. In fact, he saw it as an opportunity. The inferior function, though it causes discomfort, is also the bridge to the unconscious, and it plays a major role in the process of individuation, becoming a whole, balanced self. By becoming aware of this weaker side and learning to work with it, not suppress it, we start to integrate the unconscious into consciousness. But integration doesn't mean the inferior function becomes dominant. It simply means we become more aware of its influence and learn to respect and develop it over time. This development often begins in midlife, when people start to question their roles, choices, and deeper meaning. A dominant thinker might begin to explore feelings they've long avoided. A dominant sensor may start to pay attention to symbols, dreams, or abstract patterns. This is a powerful stage in psychological growth, where the person becomes more flexible, reflective, and multidimensional. Let's take an example. Suppose someone is a dominant extroverted feeling type, outgoing, compassionate, and tuned into others' emotions. Their inferior function would be introverted thinking. In early life, they may avoid complex analysis or abstract theories, but as they mature, they might start enjoying structured thinking, philosophy, or quiet, logical reflection. This doesn't mean they stop being emotionally attuned. It means they now have more tools to navigate life with both heart and reason. The inferior function also plays a vital role in dreams, symbols, and fantasies. Jung noticed that people often encounter their inferior function in symbolic forms, like shadow figures, animals, or unfamiliar characters, during dreams or moments of crisis. These symbols represent aspects of ourselves that we haven't fully accepted or understood yet. By engaging with them through dream work, art, or reflection, we begin to reclaim these lost parts of ourselves. Importantly, Jung warned that ignoring the inferior function could lead to imbalance and even neurosis. When one function dominates and the opposite remains completely unconscious, the personality becomes rigid and one-sided. Life starts to feel empty, repetitive, or out of control. But when we courageously face the inferior function, we begin to access deeper layers of creativity, wisdom, and authenticity. In the end, the inferior function isn't a flaw, it's a mirror. It shows us the parts of ourselves we've pushed away, and in doing so, it holds the key to deeper transformation. Jung's insight was profound. Our weakness can become our greatest teacher, and by embracing this neglected side of ourselves, we move one step closer to wholeness. At the heart of Carl Jung's psychological theory is the concept of individuation, a lifelong journey of becoming your true self. It's not about becoming perfect or even becoming someone entirely new. Instead, Individuation is about integrating all the parts of your personality, especially those you've ignored, suppressed, or never understood. It is the process of transformation from a divided, one-sided self into a whole, unified individual. For Jung, individuation was more than a psychological goal. It was a spiritual and existential path. Most of us begin life dominated by certain personality traits, especially our dominant function. We rely on this trusted way of seeing and reacting to the world. Whether that's thinking, feeling, sensation, or intuition, it becomes our identity. We develop habits, beliefs, and choices based on this function, and life seems to work, at least for a while. But as life goes on, especially around midlife, something starts to shift. We encounter experiences that challenge us. Our strengths no longer solve every problem. Patterns repeat. Emotions rise unexpectedly. We begin to sense that parts of ourselves are missing, or perhaps buried. Jung believed this was not a crisis, but a calling. These moments of discomfort are invitations to begin the work of individuation. Individuation asks us to turn inward and explore the parts of ourselves that we have ignored, most notably our inferior function and our shadow. This can be uncomfortable. A logical person may struggle with emotional depth. An intuitive dreamer might resist practical reality, but individuation doesn't ask us to replace who we are. It asks us to balance ourselves, to make peace with our inner opposites. This process unfolds gradually. It starts with self-awareness, understanding your dominant and auxiliary functions, recognizing the presence of your inferior function, and accepting the influence of your unconscious. It often includes confronting projections, those traits we see and judge in others that actually live within ourselves. For example, a person who judges others as overly emotional might be denying their own hidden feelings. Through this recognition, we reclaim these lost parts and grow more whole. Dreams play a key role in this process. Jung believed that the unconscious communicates through symbols, especially in dreams, which can guide us toward what we need to integrate. If a person is overly focused on logic, they might dream of water, symbolizing emotion and intuition. If someone is too dependent on others' approval, they might dream of taking a solo journey, representing independence. These symbols are not random. They are messages from the unconscious, guiding us towards psychological balance. Individuation also involves embracing your true identity, not just the roles you've been taught to play. Society, culture, and family often push us to develop certain traits while suppressing others. A man may be encouraged to be strong but not sensitive. A woman may be taught to be nurturing but not assertive. Individuation requires breaking free from these imposed roles and discovering who you really are beneath them. It is a move from the persona, the mask we wear in public, to the self, the deeper, unified core of our being. Importantly, individuation is not isolation. While it is a deeply personal journey, it often leads to deeper connections with others. When we know and accept ourselves more fully, we become more open, empathetic, and present. We stop projecting our issues onto others and instead relate to them as they are. This makes individuation not just a personal healing, but a relational one. Jung also saw individuation as a path to meaning. In a world that often feels chaotic or superficial, individuation grounds us. It gives us purpose beyond success, beyond social approval, beyond ego. It asks, who are you really? What is your life trying to become? By following this path, we move from a life driven by outside expectations to a life guided by inner truth. In the end, individuation is not a destination, it is a journey. It unfolds across a lifetime, with each stage offering new lessons and deeper integration. It is a return to the self, not the self we pretend to be, but the self we truly are. And as we walk this path, embracing both our strengths and our shadows, we become not perfect, but whole. That, for Jung, was the true goal of psychological development. The Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, MBTI, is one of the most well-known personality assessments in the world, used by millions for career guidance, relationship advice, and personal development. But what many people don't realize is that the MBTI is built almost entirely on the foundation of Carl Jung's theory of psychological types. Jung never designed a test, but his deep insights into human consciousness became the core inspiration for the MBTI's structure and popularity. Jung's original theory proposed that people perceive and judge the world through 4 primary psychological functions: thinking, feeling, sensation, and intuition. These functions are further influenced by 2 attitudes: introversion and extroversion, which describe the direction of one's psychic energy. For example, an extroverted thinker focuses on logical systems in the external world, while an introverted thinker processes logic internally and may appear quiet or abstract. Jung believed that each person had a dominant function and an auxiliary function, forming a unique psychological profile. In the 1940s, 2 American women, Catherine Cook Briggs and her daughter Isabel Briggs Myers, took Jung's ideas and expanded them into a practical tool. Their goal was to help people understand themselves and each other better, especially in the workplace and in relationships. They developed the MBTI based on Jung's 8 personality types, but added their own structure, resulting in the now familiar 16 personality types. The MBTI introduces 4 pairs of preferences, each rooted in Jung's concepts. 1. Extroversion, E versus introversion, I. Where do you direct your energy? Outward toward people and activity, or inward toward thoughts and reflection? 2nd, sensing, S versus intuition, N. Do you focus on concrete information from the senses or abstract patterns and possibilities? 3. Thinking, T versus feeling, F. Do you make decisions using logic and principles or personal values and empathy? 4. Judging, J versus perceiving, P. Do you prefer structure and planning or flexibility and spontaneity? These preferences combine into a 4-letter personality type, like INTJ, ESFP, or INFP, each one reflecting a specific arrangement of dominant and auxiliary functions, attitudes, and orientations. For example, an INFJ type typically leads with introverted intuition, supported by extroverted feeling, a pairing that reflects Jung's type theory almost directly. What makes the MBTI so enduring is that it gives people a language for self-understanding. While Jung's original writings were complex and philosophically rich, the MBTI simplified these ideas for everyday use without completely losing their depth. It opened up Jung's work to educators, counselors, managers, and individuals seeking insight into themselves. However, it's important to note that the MBTI has its limits. Unlike Jung's flexible and evolving model, MBTI tends to present personality types as fixed categories. Jung, on the other hand, saw type as a starting point, not a box. He believed in the potential for psychological growth, where a person could strengthen less developed functions over time and move toward wholeness through individuation. MBTI doesn't always capture that dynamic process of change, focusing more on description than development. Still, the MBTI continues to honor Jung's legacy by keeping his core insights alive. That people perceive and judge the world in fundamentally different ways, and that these differences are not flaws, but essential parts of who we are. Understanding these differences can help reduce conflict, deepen empathy, and promote better communication in all areas of life. Perhaps one of the most profound aspects of this connection is how Jung's inner journey, his exploration of the unconscious, archetypes, and shadow, translates into a modern tool that helps people understand their outer behavior. The MBTI may not capture the mystical or symbolic richness of Jung's deeper theories, but it serves as an accessible bridge between Jung's depth psychology and real-world personal discovery. In essence, the MBTI is Jung's work made practical. It takes his ideas out of the realm of abstract theory and into the everyday world, where people can recognize their patterns, understand their challenges, and begin the process of self-awareness. And while it's just a starting point, not the whole journey, it's one that has helped countless people take their first step inward toward understanding their personality, their potential, and ultimately, their true self. At the heart of Carl Jung's psychological theories lies the concept of the shadow, the part of the unconscious mind that contains all the aspects of ourselves we have repressed, denied, or failed to integrate. These are the traits, desires, and impulses that we deem unacceptable, uncomfortable, or incompatible with our ideal self-image. While we typically think of the shadow as negative, Jung saw it as an essential part of our totality, representing both the darker and lighter aspects of who we are. Shadow work is the process of acknowledging and integrating these hidden parts of ourselves, a journey that is crucial for personal growth, healing, and becoming a more authentic and whole individual. The shadow consists of everything about us that we reject or ignore, whether consciously or unconsciously. It can include negative traits like anger, greed, or jealousy, but it can also include positive qualities we've learned to suppress, such as assertiveness, passion, or creativity. For example, someone who was raised to be overly passive and accommodating might develop a shadow side that harbors unexpressed anger or frustration. On the other hand, a person who prides themselves on being logical might suppress their more emotional and intuitive qualities. This repression creates a split between what we show the world and what lies beneath the surface. The result? A person who is out of touch with parts of themselves, leading to inner conflict, projection, and disconnection from their true self. Jung believed that shadow work is an essential part of the individuation process, becoming the full, integrated self. The key is recognizing that the shadow is not something to fear or destroy, but something to embrace and understand. By engaging in shadow work, we start to dissolve the boundaries between our conscious and unconscious selves. This process is deeply transformative because it allows us to see the aspects of ourselves we have been avoiding or rejecting and reclaim them in a constructive way. One of the most significant elements of shadow work is self-awareness. To begin this journey, we must first become aware of our projections, those moments when we project our own denied qualities onto others. For instance, if you feel frustrated with someone who is always selfish, it may be worth considering whether you've suppressed your own desires or needs to the point that you can't recognize them in yourself. These projections act as mirrors, reflecting parts of our own shadow back to us. Once we begin to see our projections, we can start to accept and integrate these aspects. This requires humility and courage, acknowledging our flaws and shadow traits without judgment or shame. It's not easy. It's much easier to remain in denial or to project these negative traits onto others. But through conscious reflection, journaling, therapy, meditation, or even creative expression, we can slowly bring the unconscious into consciousness, making peace with parts of ourselves we have long rejected. Shadow work is also about learning to listen to our dreams and intuitions, as these are often gateways to understanding what lies beneath the surface. Jung believed that the unconscious communicates with us in symbols, especially in dreams. These symbols may represent repressed emotions, desires, or traits, and by examining them, we can gain insight into our shadow. For instance, a dream about a powerful, uncontrollable storm might represent repressed anger or emotional turmoil. By facing these symbols and what they represent, we begin to understand the messages of the unconscious and integrate them into our conscious life. Another aspect of shadow work involves accepting our imperfections. We live in a society that often encourages us to project an image of success, beauty, and perfection. But shadow work reminds us that true growth comes not from pretending to be perfect, but from accepting our humanity, our vulnerabilities, flaws, and contradictions. This acceptance doesn't mean giving up on personal development or excusing harmful behavior. It means acknowledging that we are complex beings and that our imperfections are a natural part of who we are. Through shadow work, we also begin to heal the wounds that have caused us to repress certain aspects of ourselves. These wounds could be from childhood, trauma, or past relationships, and they often lead us to split ourselves into parts, what Jung called the persona and the shadow. The persona is the mask we wear to present ourselves to the world, while the shadow is the hidden part of ourselves we refuse to show. When we do the work of integrating these parts, we allow ourselves to step into our full potential, unburdened by the constraints of past wounds or societal expectations. Embracing the shadow leads to greater authenticity, self-compassion, and personal power. As we recognize and accept the parts of ourselves we once feared or rejected, we become more whole.